The digital RAM, new risk and new tools. Thank you for World Anti-Bullying Forum for having me. This lecture will really briefly talk about new risk and therefore new parental obligations. Now, the digital realm and children, it's important to note that 1 out of 3 internet users is a child, and that the average age of using the internet is 10 years old. Social media is very popular with kids. By the age children reach the age of 12, 50% of children use social media. Again, by the age children get to the age of 12, 50% of children use social media. It's very important to put in your back of your mind because it's an important number, even though social media usually do not allow use below the age of 13. 50% of children use social media. Now, the risk. Cyberbullying, of course, it goes without saying. Exposure to offensive material also. Cyberbullying is within that risk. But another risk that I just want to touch on is gaming disorder. 2018, it was recognized by the World Health Organization as a disorder. And actually, I want to focus on a new class action that goes on in Canada on behalf of 2 children, aged 10 and 15. The parents claim that the game is so addictive that it has caused harm to their children. Now, the suit contends that Epigame is the company that developed Fortnite, hired a psychologist to help designers of the game to make the game as addictive as possible and therefore very hard to stop playing. Now they're comparing this to the tobacco case and saying that there is no warning sticker on video games, which means that many parents and players have no idea how addictive the games are. It's very interesting how this lawsuit will unfold, but this is a very real and imminent risk that I think us as a society, legislators, educators, and parents need to be aware of. Now, what are the available tools? Of course, the tools that I will deal with are law, the law that is relevant, and I will focus on a very important case, Reno versus ACLU. Reno versus ACLU was decided in 1996. The U.S. Congress passed a Child Online Protection Act targeting content that is harmful to minors. Now, an organization called ACLU fought this act, saying that it's harmful to freedom of speech. And the judges that reside on this case, the average age was 62, I believe. The year was 1996. The internet, as we know it, was in its inception. And therefore, the judges didn't actually understood the media when they decided, by the way, that it was vague and therefore it did not pass. And I believe that this is a landmark case that actually created the internet to be what it is today, an unregulated medium. Even when it comes to children, it's very hard to regulate. And I think that Reno versus ACLU was a case that actually built this whole internet to be the way it is today. So again, when judges were comparing the internet to broadcast use, let's say like the radio, because you cannot say offensive word during the day in the radio. It's considered harmful. So when it was compared to the broadcast case, they said that the internet is not comparable to broadcast media because the receiver is the listener or the internet user, the child. The receiver risk of accidental encounter of offensive material is very, very low. The risk by accident is remote because a series of affirmative steps is required to access specific material. The odds are slim This is from the Supreme Court case. The odds are slim that a user would enter a sexually explicit site by accident. Now, this was in 1996. Now we know how easy it is for children to access sexually offensive sites. And also, look what it says here in bold: a child requires some sophistication and some ability to read, to retrieve material, and thereby to use the internet unattended. So basically, I think that the judges in Reno versus ACLU did not understand the medium or the way it will develop to be. And the case was decided based on that misunderstanding. Sorry about that. Now, what is the law? Now, here I also want to say something. I believe that the solution to deal with cyberbullying is actually educational and not legal. However, law exists, and it exists in every country. The criminal liability age is different. In Israel, the criminal liability age is 12. If we look at the age of 12 as an age of criminal liability, and I bring you back to the beginning of my lecture, that 50% of children use the internet and use social media below the age of 12. So therefore, we have a gap between the age of 12 and 10, when children actually start using social media. And in this gap, where we don't have any legal liability, I think that parental responsibility should be much stronger and much apparent. Now, the offenses are very simple. You could be sued for defamation and for harassment and for cyberbullying and threat and invasion of privacy. And there's a very interesting law in Israel called video law. And the video law is actually dealing specifically with cyberbullying. It was amended, the law in Israel was amended in 2014, and the amendment stated that the publication of an image, video, or recording of a person that focuses on his sexuality without his consent will be considered sexual harassment, punishable by maximum of 5 years imprisonment. Now, this is a very big law, a very big change, and it actually focuses on publication in the internet, which is great because, however, if we look at how it was enforced since 2014, it was not used more than 20 times. I believe even 10, but give it the benefit of the doubt, 20 times against youth, which means that there is under enforcement, and we will look what is this under enforcement. Now, when we look at parents, the parental obligation usually to be liable as a parent, you need for the behavior of the children, it has to be deemed that the parents were negligent in their obligation to provide proper parental care and supervision. So you need to provide, to show negligence, you need to show awareness that the parents was aware that his child was misbehaving or acting offensively online. And then usually there are fines. In Israel, the fines is about $20,000. It can run from $10,000 to $25,000 or $30,000. That's the amount. And now we will talk about what is the solution. Now, I identify several trends. Of course, the world is awake. I think that the World Anti-Bullying Forum probably has discussed it. 2019, the European Parliament resolution that calls for improving access to children's rights. And in February 2021, the UN Committee on the Rights of the Child adopted General Comment 25 on children's rights. What does it mean? It means that it clarifies what the digital environment means for children's civil rights and freedom, the right to privacy, non-discrimination, protection, education, and more. It also explains why states and other duty bearers must act and how they should act. The GDPR, of course, we all know, protect children privacy as it requires parental consent. So we see that the world does have some sort of an awakening regarding cyberbullying and how we should treat it. But I believe there are some blind spots, and the blind spot I want to focus on. And from these blind spots, we need to have new parental obligation. So first, there is underreporting. Children do not report about being bullied. Research says that between 10 to 25%, only 10 to 25% of children actually tell their parents that they were bullied. Most of the children only tell it to a friend of theirs or just keep silent about it. Even when children do tell, there is under enforcement because it's very hard to actually enforce any legal offenses or legal liability, even if the child is 12 or 13 years old. And another important factor is that children do not identify offensive behavior. They don't identify that their rights has been violated. And it's, naming, claiming, blaming. They can't even name that they're being that their rights has been violated. So what can we do? And it's good because I have 3 full minutes to talk about what can we do. Laura Schlesig talks about architecting the technology. Let's design the technology in a manner that will guard social values. So first, let's talk about social values, and then let's design the technology accordingly. Extending children responsibility, extending parental responsibility, and extending social network responsibility. I believe that the key is actually that the key to successful online communication and peaceful online communication and to keep children safe online is actually within the social media. With great powers comes great responsibility. There's nothing more to say. And about parental responsibilities. So, first and foremost, parents need to attend online. The younger your child is, the more attendance is required. So if your child receives his phone at the age of 10 or 9 or 8, you should be online with your child. You should teach your child digital empathy. In the last World Anti-Bullying Forum, this term was very, very spoken of. Digital empathy, meaning we need to teach our children how to behave online, teach them what are the consequences of transferring images, or what does it mean to communicate in big groups. We need to emphasize reporting. If we talk about the blind spots, right? The children do not report, so we need to give our children more means of reporting. They can report anonymously in school, or maybe they can, report to anyone, not only the parents. In Israel, we have an online, not an online, but 105 it's called. It's a new governmental entity that deals specifically with cyberbullying that occurs with minors. So reporting is a key and a very, very important element. Another important element is let's provide the children with identification and coping mechanism. Remember, we said the children do not even realize, they cannot even identify that their rights are being violated. So let's teach children what are their rights and how are they violated and in what form. We need to be alert for addictive symptoms, going back to the gaming disorder. And the most important thing, we need to be and set a personal example. Don't use your phone so much. Don't take it to family dinners. Advise your child if you want to publish his picture. Then he will know that he has the right to refuse for a picture to be advertised. Thank you very much for your time and your listening. This is the partial list of references, and I will be there for any questions that you have. Thank you so much. Have a great rest of the day.
Hello, everyone. My name is Jorge Varela. I will presenting my paper with other colleagues that we developed in Chile, Cristóbal Hernández and Christian Berger. Unfortunately, I can't make it to the conference, so I am recording my presentation, this video, about cyberbullying, individual protective factors, and depression among Chilean adolescents during the pandemic COVID last year in our country. So our idea was to understand a little bit better about cyberbullying behavior, taking into account two elements. First, what's going on between young adults and adolescents, and second, considering the context of the pandemic, which, as you know, in Chile and all over the place, we have to face different type of quarantines, and people stop going to classes. We have to shut down the schools, universities. So pretty much everyone went to an online context. Taking this into account, we start to wonder about to what extent cyberbullying behavior will increase during the pandemic, considering the complex dynamic of this behavior itself. As you can see in my slide, there is a larger discussion in terms of to what extent cyberbullying is an independent aggressive behavior or is just a version of bullying behavior, because we are not sure about the power imbalance. We are not sure about the boundaries of this behavior, and we don't really know which one is the audience. In the traditional bullying behavior, we know that it happened in the school, but when we take into account technologies with, for example, Instagram, Snapchat, or any other kind of electronic devices, we don't really know the larger audience of this behavior. But we agree that we think about an international behavior that causes harm, and it has negative consequences. That is why we wanted to know more about the context of cyberbullying and link it with depression. As an example of international results, for example, you know, the Microsoft Index, they collect data even during the pandemic in their 5th version, and you can see that different results change in different parts of the world, taking into account this particular index. Latin American countries in particular, they increase their results. They show a little bit of improvement in their civic digital behavior, which is a good thing. And Chile in particular has a really positive result, so which is a good news, but we don't really know to what extent that was related to depression and other personal problems for our adolescents and young adults. As you know, the prevalence of cyberbullying is really varies across country. For instance, this last or more recent as a meta-analytic review show the range of prevalence for less than 10% or over to 60% as a victim of cyberbullying or as a perpetrator. We can understand these results considering that the nature of cyberbullying change and the way we study this behavior, the way we decide to make the range of time and based also on the type of instrument that we use. That's why I think we see all the time different prevalence of this behavior. But we agree that this is a behavior that causes negative effect. We can link it, for example, with depressive symptoms of substance abuse or use. We know there is a direct or indirect effect on suicidal ideation or depressive symptoms. When also we can isolate the effect size of cyberbullying, because we know there is an important overlap with bullying behavior, and still we see this negative link. That's what, for us, our first hypothesis was during the pandemic, people went to online activities all the time. So what if cyberbullying increases? Therefore, our link with depression and other similar symptoms will be also related to cyberbullying behavior. What is that? We know from previous studies that when think about what are the risk factors or protective factors for cyberbullying and bullying. Sometimes they share some of these predictors, sometimes they have unique variable as a predictor. For example, in this recent study, we can identify individual, country level, and other contextual variables that explain bullying and cyberbullying. For example, engage in fightings and bully other will be increase the likelihood or engage of cyberbullying. At the same time, we also see risk related to other psychosocial adjustments that will decrease the likelihood of cyberbullying or the relationship with others. Which is important to take into account because we will see not only one variable that is related with cyberbullying, but also something else that we wanted to explore was if we can develop or identify some individual resources among individuals that can become unprotected factors. For example, when we see victims and we see, for example, their level of empathy and emotional intelligence, that become in different studies as an important protective factor, which is really interesting in the context of the pandemic because kids, adolescents, young adults, they were not in the schools, right? They were going to these online classes, well, to some of them. So at that level, I think considering this individual protective factor was a key element. Another study, a little bit older, also identified different protective factors, and they highlight the higher level of effects. The odds ratio was those that were self-oriented and personal competence among individuals. For example, self-esteem, life satisfaction, and emotional management as an example of individual resources that can become this protective factor against cyberbullying victimization in this case. Taking this into account, in the last years, we have been studying this behavior within Latin American samples. For example, we just published a study with Peruvian adolescents with Dr. Oliol and Dr. Miranda, and we found evidence of gratitude as an individual resource or as an individual protective factor for adolescents that were victims of cyberbullying. They show less lower levels of life satisfaction over time, but for those adolescents who self-report higher level of gratitude, we found evidence of this becoming an individual protected factor or an individual asset, which is a good news in terms of the skills that we develop among students or among young adults. Therefore, we wanted to explore this in the context of the pandemics, and in particular, we wanted to see two possible individual strategies or coping strategies, such as disconnecting, just shut it down, social media or internet resources, or just ignore the situation. And we wanted to see to what extent those individual strategies become a protective factor of the negative effect of cyberbullying on depression among youth during the pandemic. For this purpose, we developed two studies in Chile. We replicate the studies with two different samples. First, during August 2020, we developed the first sample of the study in the capital of the city, which concentrate more than half of the population, close to 70% of the population. But then we replicate this study in December in the same year with the same question, but at national level. And we use the StatNose methodology sampling, which they use artificial intelligence to collect data using social media, social networks to collect subjects to reply to the study. So the first sample in the capital of the country, we had a sample of 2,056 participants, but we wanted to focus on adolescents. So we select a subsample of adolescents and also victims of cyberbullying. Therefore, we have 462 subjects, mostly women, 73.4% were women, and then we also replicate the same analysis in the larger national sample with 94 participants. Again, another subsample of the national sampler from that study, from all over the place. We use three measures. First, to capture depression, we use the PH9 questionnaire, which is, I believe, is a really well-known instrument. It has been used in another studies in Chile. It's a 9 linear questions or self-report measures as a proxy of depression. Of course, to make the diagnosis, you need more information, but this instrument is a really good proxy to study depression among participants. Also, to measure cyberbullying, we adapt the measure developed by Induja and Patchin. They're well-known researchers in the world of cyberbullying. They believe they are also as a keynote speaker in the conference to measure the prevalence and the frequency of cyberbullying victimization in this case. And as I mentioned to you before, we wanted to see two possible coping strategies with a binary responses of disconnecting from social media or just ignoring what is happening. And the question was just like that. Have you ever disconnected? Or you can disconnect or ignore the situation. And we compare those responses with the other two measures. So our analysis was basically using ordinary regressions analysis with interaction effect for these two possible moderator variables, which is ignoring and disconnecting. So some of the results here you can see means and some distribution of our key variables controlling from a bunch of other control variables. I wanted to go to the interaction effects. So for our first hypothesis was to what extent disconnected from social media is a protective factor or become a moderator variable. As you can see, we can see that effect in the two samples. A on the left is the regional, is the Santiago sample. On the right is the national sample. And in both cases, we found evidence that disconnected from social media was associated with an increased depressive symptom, but when the frequency of cyberbullying was low on the left, opposite what's going on the right. So at first we can see some evidence of our hypothesis. Then when we rerun reanalysis using, in this case, ignoring as a protective factor or as a moderator variable, again, we found a similar results, which was consistent with our hypothesis and also was interesting because you can see that disconnecting or ignoring the situation is not the same if you were higher levels of victim of cyberbullying compared to lower level of victimization. So considering our results, I think we can discuss different ideas. First, something that's really important, especially in the context of the pandemic, that cyberbullying victimization is related with depressive symptoms for both samples in the capital of the country and also at national level, which is consistent with previous study and make a lot of sense of what's going on during the pandemic. Second, I think we provide evidence for two possible protective factors, but they will operate in a different way, considering the level of victimization. That being said, in higher levels of victimization, I think they play a role of disconnecting and ignoring in an important way. But for example, disconnecting from social media is not really well or is not really positive. In fact, that can create more isolation among youth, especially if you self-report lower level of cyberbullying. But again, I think we highlight these two possible mechanisms that you can develop. You can teach at school, or you can work with families to develop those two personal resources. But we know that it's important to think this in a larger, broad, right? Take into account not only individual variables, but also contextual school and community factors. I think the pandemic also highlight the need for develop these personal resources, and I want to invite you also for this special issue that is developed by Dr. Smith, Cyberbullying from a Lifespan Perspective with Dr. Bartlett and myself. We are also inviting a lot of researchers for this special issue. I hope you can join us and just keep talking and discussing about cyberbullying research in Chile and of course all over the place. Thank you very much.